Welcome. In this video, we learn how to configure data center redundancy between two COP clusters. HP Aruba Networking Central on-premises supports data center redundancy to ensure services are available with minimum downtime in case of a failover. The configuration workflow has three parts. First, schedule backup on both COP clusters, either full backup or incremental backup. Ensure both clusters have same type of backup mode. Second, pair the clusters. Lastly, enable redundancy. Ensure to go through these prerequisites and important points. These are the prerequisites. Ensure both the HP Aruba Networking Central on-premises clusters are running on the same version and have same number of nodes on their clusters. If you add nodes to any cluster, ensure to add the same number of nodes to the other cluster also. Otherwise, node mismatch error is encountered. Ensure both the clusters are active and healthy. Ensure both the clusters were installed using the same deployment type, like online, offline, FIPS, appliance, or non-appliance. Ensure the backup server has access to both the clusters, and the clusters must have good latency and bandwidth, above 1 gigabit per second for a faster backup operation. A bandwidth of 10 gigabits per second throughput is recommended for optimal performance between the backup server and HP Aruba Networking Central on-premises clusters. Both clusters must be configured with DHCP option 43 for the instant APs to support data center redundancy. Therefore, it is not required to establish WebSocket connection for instant APs. Ensure that ZTP is supported for the switches in the DR cluster for the DHCP provisioning of primary and secondary cluster IP. If incremental backup type is configured on DR-enabled clusters and a failover occurs, the backup and restore of data on the new primary or secondary does not continue for remaining days of the current cycle. Instead, it starts new from the next cycle. The following screen will show you how to configure data center redundancy using the web UI. In this example, we will first configure the details on the cluster that will be assigned the primary role. Here, COP single will be primary and COP 5N, IAP will be secondary. Schedule the backup on primary. Click System Management and select Backup and Restore. Click Backup later. In this example, we are setting full backup as the backup mode. Specify all the parameters and click Save. Schedule the backup on secondary. Ensure to choose a different time than what was specified for the primary cluster to avoid concurrent maintenance windows on both clusters. But select the same type of backup mode for both clusters. This is our primary. Let's proceed to configure. Navigate to Data Center Redundancy tab. Click the plus icon to add the details of the peer cluster. Here, we choose the initial role as primary. Copy the DR pairing key from the secondary cluster and paste here. Navigate to the DR tab on secondary cluster and click Copy DR pairing key to clipboard and paste in primary cluster. Click Add and you will see that the cluster details are displayed in the redundancy status table. Now let us repeat add primary cluster details in the secondary. Choose the initial role as secondary and then add the DR pairing key by copying it from the primary cluster. Pairing process will take some time, and the details will be displayed on both the web UIs after enabling redundancy. Enable the redundancy on both clusters. The secondary cluster goes into the maintenance mode, and the backup data from the primary cluster is restored in the secondary cluster. The days for restore frequency is 3 days by default. This value indicates that there is a 3-day interval between 2 consecutive restore operations. And time to failover is applicable only for auto failover method. When the secondary cluster does not get a response from the primary cluster or vice versa, then the secondary cluster considers primary cluster is down after the specified time. In such a scenario, the secondary cluster attains the role of primary. This switchover process takes approximately 60 minutes. Repeat the same steps in secondary cluster. After the pairing has completed, the details like current role, health status, last heartbeat, and last failover are displayed in the redundancy status tables of both clusters. Once DR is enabled and successful on the secondary, its web UI will no longer be accessible. Web UI of the primary displays details of both clusters on the redundancy status table. Also, please note the following limitations. If factory reset is done on any one cluster, then DR must be reconfigured on both the clusters. Instant APs on board using PSK are not supported for DR. Only the instant APs on board using MAC address, serial number, and part number or imported using CSV are supported in DR clusters. This workflow diagram is provided as a summarization of the procedure. Configuration has 3 stages. One is scheduling backup, next pairing the clusters, and lastly enabling redundancy. Have 2 COP clusters that are mirror images of each other in deployment and configuration. Open and access both in 2 browsers. Plan which cluster you want to assign the primary role initially. We have completed the procedure of configuring the data center redundancy. Thank you for watching. We encourage you to go through the documentation for more details.